back, everybody.
You made it. So we did get the poll results in. Let's find out how everything felt.
I can't wait to find out.
I know it says, how long have you been doing the proper human diet? We have 17% of people say less than 6 months. 18% of people say 6 months to a year. 59% of people say more than a year. That is so exciting.
Wow.
And 6% are considering starting and excited to learn more.
How long have you been doing keto?
Almost 3 years now.
Almost 3 years, and I'm about 3.5 years. Just love this lifestyle, and I love this community.
Yeah.
So up next, we have Dr. David Diamond, and he's going to share with you a talk on should you be concerned about high LDL cholesterol when you're on a low-carb diet.
Now, Dr. David Diamond received his Ph.D. in biology in 1985 with a specialization in behavioral neuroscience from the Center for Neurobiology of Learning and Memory at the University of California, Irvine. He was a career scientist at the Department of Veterans Affairs for 30 years and is currently a professor in the departments of psychology and molecular pharmacology and physiology at the University of South Florida, where he has directed his research program on post-traumatic stress disorder.
Now, Dr. Diamond has been funded by the VA, the NIH, the DoD, the NSF, and pharmaceutical companies in his neuroscience research with over 100 publications, reviews, book chapters on the brain, stress, and memory. In the past decade, Dr. Diamond has expanded his research program to address obesity, cardiovascular disease, medication, and nutrition research.
He has published research on controversial issues in heart disease, diet, and cholesterol to add to his extensive list of peer-reviewed medical publications. In recognition of the importance of his work to healthcare issues, he has been invited to present his research on nutrition, diet, and cholesterol at numerous domestic and international cardiology, obesity, and diabetes meetings.
Well, without any further ado, here is Dr. Diamond.
Nisha, for all the great work you've done for hosting this meeting and for inviting me to talk about cholesterol and low-carb diet. So let's get started. And let's get started. There we go. So a bit of a disclosure. As you heard, I've got my PhD in biology, and for 40 years, I've conducted neuroscience research, both animals and clinical research, and I've been funded by all these agencies you see at the top here, as well as drug companies and some work from the exogenous ketone companies. But I'm not going to talk about any of my neuroscience research today. My research here really is just personal. As you can see here, I'm on the far right. That actually gives my risk of developing a heart attack. And this was 20 years ago. When I was diagnosed with a disease, familial hypertriglyceridemia. What this means is that my triglycerides are astronomically high. They're about 10 times the normal level you'd see in someone that doesn't have this disease and has a low risk of heart disease. My HDL was abysmally low, and I was fat. I wasn't obese, but I was clearly overweight. And so I was very concerned about this for about 5 years. I did the normal thing. I went on a low-fat diet, cut out meat, my diet.
Hey, Siri.
Sorry?
Call Becky Warren.
I can hear somebody talking.
It's okay, David. You can go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I tried to do it on my own. 5 years, low-fat diet. So I'm eating bread without the butter. I'm not eating much meat. And all that happened in the 5 years was I gained weight, I got fatter, and my triglycerides went even higher. So I was clearly in trouble. This is 20 years ago. I was 43 years of age at the time. At some point, my doctor I've been seeing every year was very concerned about my health, said basically just as you have in this ad, you've done your best. You've exercised. You've tried the best diet. It's time for you to go on Lipitor because you have such a high risk of developing a heart attack. And I remember being very concerned that day. I went back to my office. And I just realized, well, listen, I know enough biology that I should read a bit about triglycerides. I knew a lot about the brain, but I didn't know much about heart disease, especially triglycerides and HDL. That day, about 15 years ago, I read some papers on triglycerides. I realized that what causes high triglycerides is too much carbohydrate consumption. What causes low HDL? Too much carbohydrate consumption. So everything I'd been doing was wrong. So those few papers that I read 15 years ago have now expanded to a few thousand papers. So this is now a second area of my research in addition to the neuroscience research that I'm still doing. So the theme of what I'm going to present, I think, is very well illustrated by this picture, this cartoon. So there's a story of the man who lost his keys. And so someone came by and said, "Why are you looking under the streetlight?" And he said, "Well, that's where the light is brightest." And so he's not seeing the key behind him in the dark. And so I think that's useful when we think about cholesterol and heart disease. Cholesterol is in the streetlight. So originally total cholesterol, then a subcomponent, LDL-C, was linked to coronary heart disease. That's what's been in the streetlight for 50, 60 years. Why is it under the streetlight? Well, first thing we simply have to address is this is incredibly profitable. Okay, by lowering cholesterol, you can have the food and drug companies have basically profited extremely well. So looking on here, you have in which you eat beans or you eat nuts, lower your cholesterol. Eat corn oil to lower your cholesterol. Eat oatmeal to lower your cholesterol. My goodness, eat Cheerios. It's heart healthy, lower your cholesterol. And of course, take statins to lower your cholesterol, all of which means then that you're at a lower risk of heart disease. So there are tremendous profits. And that's what you've got to keep in mind is that profit can motivate researchers to implicate LDL in causing heart disease. So what I'm going to cover is that there is so much more important than cholesterol. We have been misled as to the importance of cholesterol in causing heart disease. I'm of course going to talk about diet. I'm going to focus on triglycerides, HDL, which is called the good cholesterol, and one component of LDL, the SD or small dense LDL. I'm going to focus also on a disorder called familial hypercholesterolemia, or FH, which is so misunderstood. What everybody in medical school learns, what doctors learn is that people with FH have an abnormality in their LDL receptor, which causes them to have extremely high levels of cholesterol, and these people have a higher rate of heart disease. So the cholesterol has been said to cause their heart disease, and I'm going to tell you that that's wrong. Now the issue is statins. So should you take a statin when you're on low-carb diet? There has never been a study that's looked at CAC is coronary artery calcium. That's something that's really been ignored. And so, and I hope that everybody can hear me okay. I think there have been some hands raised. So I just want to confirm, is everything good with the slides and the audio?
Yes, you sound great.
Okay. All right, so I'll talk about coronary calcium just briefly, but it is so much more important than talking about cholesterol. All right, so what really demonized cholesterol? So one of the most important studies and most important groups was Brown and Goldstein. They won the Nobel Prize in the 1980s for their work on the LDL receptor and cholesterol. And so when Brown and Goldstein said in 1984 there was a causal relation between LDL and atherosclerosis, well, that was it. The dogma was created. And so everyone accepted, therefore, that LDL caused heart disease. The only problem they were faced with was they had to find data to actually support the implication and the conviction of LDL as causing heart disease. Brown and Goldstein actually never showed that. So here is a study that is still cited that was so important in the 1980s because this is what propelled people to be convinced that cholesterol, high cholesterol will kill you, will cause you coronary heart disease death. So this is a study in which you have over 350,000 men who were studied in the 1970s into 1980s. And so in these red bars, what you are looking at is the rate of death, not just heart attacks. You're looking at the rate of death based on total cholesterol levels. So at the far end at 150, that's very low cholesterol. And those red bars go up and up and up. And so that means with each increment of cholesterol, it brings you closer to death. So any 1% increase in cholesterol will increase your death rate by 2%. So this is very frightening for people to see, and it confirmed that increased cholesterol will cause you to die. When I read this paper, what I wanted to do is actually look at the raw data, because the data on the left, what that means is that's your reference value. 1.0 means that's the lowest value for death. 2.0 means you're twice as likely to die, 3.0 3 times, and 4.0 means 4 times more likely to die. So that's a ratio, okay? So what we want to know is how many people actually died in this study. So in the next graph, next component, I'm going to show you the percent of people that did not die. It's really what you're going to ask your doctor. So my cholesterol is 300. What's the likelihood that I will not die in the next 10 years? And here it is. Just pause and chew on this for a while. This is the percent of people at each level of cholesterol that did not die. And you can see these blue bars are all pretty much at the same level. And I've got a line here that's drawn at 99%. And so you can see at the lowest level of cholesterol, a little more than 99% did not die. And at the highest level of cholesterol, a little less than 99% did not die. Now, it's the same data, and I'm not accusing these people of fraud. So how do you get from basically no effect to that frightening increase in the red bars? So what's the real risk? Well, the paper reported that 0.3% of the people with the lowest cholesterol died of coronary heart disease, and at the highest level, 1.3% died of coronary heart disease. The difference across the entire range of physiological range of cholesterol is 1% in death from coronary heart disease and no difference in overall death. So how do you get from the red bars to the blue bars? This is how they do it. You take that 1.3%, which is at the highest level that died, divide it by 0.3% at the lowest level, and you get 4.3. And that's how you have the data on the left side. That's how you create the data in the red bars. And that's how you create the appearance of a 400% increase in coronary heart disease death, when it's really only a 1% difference. And why did they do this? Because the cholesterol hypothesis that cholesterol caused heart disease was dying. There was no good support. And so they preferred to show the red bar data, and they completely ignored the fact that there's really no relation between cholesterol and heart disease. This was the state of affairs in the 1980s when the cholesterol hypothesis was dying. And this is how desperate they were to get people to believe that cholesterol causes heart disease death. Now let's look at the highest level of cholesterol. This is where you're told to fear having that kind of cholesterol. I mean, if you have cholesterol that's over 290, your doctor will tell you, oh my Ken, other doctors will tell you, you've got to go on a statin. Well, the likelihood that you're not going to die in the next 10 years with extremely high cholesterol is 99%. Let's look further at this group. So this group is said to have familial hypercholesterolemia. And this was first discovered in the first half of the 20th century. Here's an old paper describing hypercholesterolemia and atherosclerosis. And so in these people, you have extremely high cholesterol. It's like 400 or 500 would be total cholesterol. Their LDL could be 200 or 300. And so you've got high cholesterol in the blood and cholesterol in the artery wall. You put those two together and you figure, well, the cholesterol must be causing the heart disease. So you look at modern studies which confirm this. So here they're talking about the burden of LDL cholesterol. And if you look at that projection from birth into your 20s, it says in that red zone, you have an extremely high risk of dying, of having an event or dying of heart disease if you have familial hypercholesterolemia. And so you must lower your cholesterol. So let's look at the studies that confirm this or don't. And let's look at the questions we should address. Well, if you have high LDL from birth, well, then therefore there should be premature all-cause death in people with this disease. And second, if we lower the cholesterol, then these people should be able to live longer. Very simple. So there are about a half of studies that have addressed, first of all, life, how long people live with FH. Here is one of the newest studies, and this is absolutely confirmed in people in which you have actually genetic confirmation that they have FH. Their cholesterol is like 300 to 400. Their LDL is like 200 to 300. And so we're looking at the rate of death. This line that goes across at 1.0 is the average rate of death in the general population for that age group. So if we look at the first 4 decades of life, the 2 bars on the left, it is slightly greater than the general population, but it is not statistically significant. And this is really important. There's a very low rate of death in the general population in the first 4 decades of life. And so if FH is killing off people early in life, well, it's not even statistically significant. They're not dying at a higher rate than the general population. Now, something very odd is happening after the age of 40. The rate of death is declining until you actually get into your 70s. And again, this is someone with cholesterol that's 400 or 500, LDL of 300. If you are 70 years of age and that is your cholesterol level, you are less likely to die in the next 10 years than someone that's got normal cholesterol. That's where that asterisk is. 40% less likely to die. You are healthier than the rest of the population if you got extremely high cholesterol and you are 70 years of age. The reason for this is cholesterol is part of the immune system. Cholesterol is able to eliminate pathogenic bacteria because it works with white blood cells. It also eliminates damaged tissue. So high cholesterol, people with high cholesterol have less cancer deaths, have less deaths from infection, and a normal rate of deaths from heart disease. This doesn't fit at all with the idea that high cholesterol is harmful. In fact, it fits with the idea that high cholesterol is actually healthy. Someone with extremely high cholesterol is healthier than the general population after the age of 60. Now, this isn't just people with FH. This is a general population. Anybody over the age of 60 is as healthy and even healthier than the general population. This is a paper that I published along with some outstanding people that I work with. MDs, cardiologists are in this paper, in which we reviewed the literature on people with the highest LDL, which is called the bad cholesterol. We did not find a single paper that showed that people with the highest LDL have a higher rate of mortality compared to the general population. And in fact, most people with the highest LDL, which is not controlled by statins, live longer than people who have normal levels of LDL. And this paper we published in British Medical Journal. Now let's look into people with FH again, because FH is seen as a serious disease that you must keep it as low as possible. Now, in this study, you have people with FH who have had a heart attack. All of them are now put on a statin, which lowers their LDL. And then you're looking 7 years later, which people had a second heart attack compared to those that had no heart attacks. And so the people here that are in red are the people that are on a statin and had a second heart attack. The people in the data in blue are the ones who are on a statin and did not have a second heart attack. And you see the LDL levels, which are extremely high, so it's not fully controlled on a statin. And there is no difference, no statistical difference between the people with versus people without a second heart attack. So what's the difference? Well, we all know that smoking is related to heart disease, and that is the same risk factor for someone with high cholesterol compared to low cholesterol. But what's really important here is when you look at the people who had the second heart attack, more than 3 times as many had that second heart attack who were smokers compared to the non-smokers. So it's not LDL that caused them to have the second heart attack. It is the fact that they were smokers. And if we look, and they have over 25 years, and I hope this is all showing on your screen. If you look out over 25 years, what you have is almost half of the people who were smokers had heart attacks, but only about 20% of the people who were non-smokers had a heart attack. And so clearly, smoking is so much more important, and the LDL turns out to be completely irrelevant. Let's look at another study, and I'm focusing on FH, again, because these are the people with the highest LDL, and they provide a model for understanding how LDL does not cause heart disease. So what we have here are people, again, with FH, cholesterol like 300 or 400, total cholesterol. And now we're looking at their LDL. And so what we have is these are actually people on statins, which is lowering their LDL. And again, we have 2 groups. And the 2 groups have the same level of cholesterol, specifically LDL, at about 150, which is about twice what the American Heart Association recommends. And the group, in this case, in red, has had no heart attacks, no stroke, no events. And that's over 10 years. And the group in blue, 20% of them had some kind of event, such as a heart attack or a stroke. And there is no difference in their LDL levels. Now, what is different? This is so important, coronary artery calcium. So we know, and this is the best measure of the likelihood someone will have a heart attack, is the amount of calcified arteries. So people who are extremely high are much more likely to have a heart attack. People who are at 0 have almost no likelihood of developing a heart attack. So here you have people with extremely high LDL and two very big differences in their coronary calcium. The ones that had heart attacks, they're the ones in blue, they have extremely high coronary calcium. The ones that didn't have heart attacks, their coronary calcium is 0. Again, evidence that it's not LDL. There are other factors. One of the factors is it contributes to high coronary calcium. So what's the difference between those with high coronary calcium and those with low coronary calcium? Well, one thing is in the blue group, they have extremely high blood sugar, fasting blood sugar. I wonder if I don't know if this is showing on yours. There we go. I don't know if I've just been able to show that for you, but I've just taken something off my screen. So you can see fasting glucose is in the pre-diabetic range for those with high coronary calcium, and you have much lower fasting glucose for those without coronary calcium. And so that tells you that the heart attack difference is not related to LDL, it's related to high blood sugar, which of course is reduced when you go low carb. Another thing, very important, and looking again at an FH study, when we look at the people who have heart attacks, again, it is not related to total cholesterol. It is not related to LDL. So we look at the left side of this graph. These are people, again, who have FH, and astronomically high cholesterol, over 350. And that arrow points to where they should be, where the American Heart Association recommends they be below 200. They're almost twice as much for total cholesterol, and they're almost 3 times higher than what's recommended for LDL. And yet the two bars are basically identical between people who have FH and heart attacks and people who don't have heart attacks. So let's look over on the right. What is the huge difference? The difference is genetic. And so a subset of people who have extremely high cholesterol also have what's called a polymorphism. They have a form of a gene that produces a protein called prothrombin. Prothrombin increases the likelihood you have a heart attack. It increases blood clotting. And so the subset of people that have the high cholesterol have this genetic anomaly. And they're the ones that have a 2.5 times rate of having a heart attack compared to those who don't have this gene. So this is something that's completely independent of their LDL levels. This is a purely genetic basis for why a subset of people have more heart attacks, and this is for FH as well as non-FH. This works for the general population. But I'm illustrating here that the people who have heart attacks have the same LDL as the people who don't have heart attacks, and it's astronomically high. So the group that I work with, outstanding MDs, we have cardiologists and physicians, in which we review the literature. So I don't just present this in talks, we reviewed the literature on people with FH. And what we found is that those individuals that have heart attacks are the ones that have higher clotting factors such as fibrinogen, okay, or the genetic anomaly. And so the people who have the heart attacks are the ones that we have here. It's called coagulopathy. They are more likely to have blood that clots spontaneously, perhaps with stress or with high blood sugar. And it has nothing to do with the fact that they happen to have high LDL. And this applies again to the general population. So here's a very large study looking at the rate of not only heart attack, which is on the left, but also stroke. And it's independent of age. So fibrinogen is a critical protein that produces, that gets the platelets to coagulate. So it's critical to be able to make clots. But if you have more fibrinogen, you're more likely then to have these spontaneous clots, which of course then contribute to heart disease and stroke. So you see the graph on the left, with increasing fibrinogen independent of age, there's an increased rate of heart attacks. On the right, increasing fibrinogen is related to increase in stroke. There is no way that you can ever see this relationship with cholesterol or LDL. And so when we look at the risk factors for heart disease and stroke, and I've outlined them here around a circle, and in the center is a picture of platelets in the process of developing a clot. So there are two things that go on. You activate the platelets, and that turns that into clots. And we also have degradation process called fibrinolysis. And the people who have heart disease through all these mechanisms are the ones that have more coagulation factors, less fibrinolysis. And each one of these risk factors for heart disease is related mechanistically to producing more clots. We need to fear excess clot formation and not cholesterol. Now, is cholesterol, specifically LDL, completely innocent? Well, yes and no. First thing to realize is that our liver packages our cholesterol into lipoproteins. That way it can travel through the watery blood. Cholesterol being kind of fatty, it can travel through the blood because it's encased in a protein shell. And so if we have low triglycerides and high HDL and low blood sugar, which is what you get when you go low carb, then the LDL that is produced ultimately by the liver is low in triglycerides. It's called native LDL, which is on the left, and it's called pattern A. So the liver itself produces what's called large buoyant LDL. And so that's the natural LDL you have in a healthy person. But a person that has high blood sugar and high triglycerides gets that packaging basically done incorrectly. There are too many triglycerides that are packaged in that LDL. And so as the LDL is passing through the blood and giving off its cholesterol to provide energy to cells, it changes into a damaged form of the LDL. And this is called the small dense LDL. And that's at the far right. This small dense LDL is more likely then to become oxidized. It's more likely to bind to sugar, which then damages the LDL. And so it is the damaged form of LDL that you do see related to heart disease. Now, this is an incredibly important study in which you look at people based on whether they have high small dense LDL, which is unhealthy, or low small dense LDL, which is what you find in healthy people. And I'm going to show you then what are their triglycerides and how many of these people have metabolic syndrome, which means they're overweight, they have high blood pressure, they have high triglycerides. So let's look at these people. The people that have high small dense LDL are in red. And so they have extremely high triglycerides. People with low small dense LDL have extremely low triglycerides. The people who have the high small dense LDL are so much more likely. 75% of them have metabolic syndrome, meaning these people also have high blood pressure and they have type 2 diabetes and they're overweight. So it's important to understand the LDL gets damaged in a damaged metabolism, a metabolism that has high blood sugar. A person that has high blood pressure is going to have damaged LDL. And that is why LDL can be associated with heart disease, but only because this is when that LDL is in an unhealthy environment. And let's look actually in the same study, the rate of people having heart disease. The people here on the left, which have high small dense LDL, this is looking at their actual rate of having a heart attack, which is higher than the people that have low small dense LDL. That is why LDL can be associated with heart disease, because this damaged LDL is in a very unhealthy environment. It's not the small dense LDL that exists by itself. It's a part of a damaged metabolism. The large buoyant LDL, this is what's actually produced by the liver, and this is when the LDL is healthy. And you see there's no relation to the incidence of heart disease in this graph. And so it's only the damaged LDL that is associated with heart disease, not your natural LDL. I had the pleasure of working with some outstanding collaborators, Blair O'Neill, a cardiologist, and Jeff Volek, an expert on nutrition. We published this paper just earlier this year. Should we be concerned about low-carb diet and cardiovascular disease? And the answer was no. So here we compared low-fat diet effects with low-carb diet effects. Let's focus on what I said was so healthy, the large buoyant LDL on the left. Look at the increase you see in large buoyant LDL with low-carb diet, and compared to the low-fat diet, it actually can go in the opposite direction. You have this trivial change in LDL-C, and LDL-C is simply a total amount of cholesterol in all the LDL particles. It's irrelevant. And the graph on the right shows that these are for all measures in which negative is a good thing, to go in the negative direction. So all these measures that you have here, body weight, blood sugar, insulin, All these measures go in the right direction. And you see this arrow on the right. The small, dense LDL drops in someone on low-carb diet, and it does not drop on someone on a low-fat diet. We summarized the research. Basically, it's a 150-year summary of low-carb diet research. And all these measures on the left are the benefits of low-carb diet. You go down that list. Every single one changes in the right direction. The only concern historically with low-carb diet is LDL-C. And again, LDL-C, as I've put forth, is irrelevant. And yet when people see high LDL-C, they worry about it, and doctors want to put people on a statin. Why? Well, they sweep that aside, and you see this cartoon, which I've seen so many times. Here's the doctor saying to the patient, you went on Atkins, you lost weight, you lowered your blood pressure, you feel great, no more joint pain. But the low-carb diet's going to give you a heart attack. And why did they say that? We wipe out everything on the left, and we call LDL bad cholesterol. And so you have too much bad cholesterol. And where does that come from? Well, it comes from the American Heart Association. You go today to the website, American Heart Association. I've provided the website. This is a disease. The disease, heart disease, occurs when LDL, the bad cholesterol, deposits cholesterol in the artery wall. So you see right here, they're making it as if it is an irritant to the wall. The body has an immune response. It has to protect itself from the cholesterol, from the invading cholesterol in the artery wall. They present cholesterol as if it is going to damage you. It is inherently the part of the heart disease process. And frankly, there is no evidence that that is correct. So, okay, with all that said, still, there's all that evidence that lowering cholesterol improves outcomes, is make it more likely that you will survive a heart attack or you won't have a heart attack. So let's cover two basic kinds of drugs that lower cholesterol. One is called CETP inhibitors. So what this drug was, it interferes with a conversion of HDL, which is a good cholesterol, into LDL, which is a bad cholesterol. So you end up with more HDL and less LDL. So that should be great. Lower the bad cholesterol, raise the good cholesterol. And of course, statins reduce LDL by interfering with the HMG-CoA reductase, which is an enzyme that's necessary to reduce cholesterol. So we'll start with the CETP inhibitors. 20 years of research, billions of dollars that were invested in the development of these drugs. And I can summarize all that basically with a news report. Multiple studies, tens of thousands of people were studied. Multiple drug companies tried this category. It had no effect. You could dramatically lower LDL with this category of drugs that not only lower the LDL, but also raise the HDL. And look what they say about it. It reduced the dangerous LDL, the bad kind, and increased the good kind. The specialists were stunned that there was no benefit. And the leader in the study, Stephen Nichols, said, it did all the right things, and it's the most mind-boggling question. How come these people didn't benefit from having their LDL lowered and their HDL raised? Well, because it's not a mind-boggling question, because LDL doesn't cause heart disease. So in this drug category, it lowered the LDL, and it didn't matter, because it didn't affect the critical factors again, the coagulation factors. So there was no benefit to this dramatic reduction in LDL. This is like a secret. Nobody wants to talk about this. But it's completely failed category of drug that lowered LDL. And of course, that leads us to the statins. This is now the wonder drug. This is the first line of defense against high LDL. These are the drugs that have had a dramatic effect lowering the incidence of heart disease in people with high cholesterol. So, and here is one of the biggest effects you'll see with statins. This was Lipitor, study done decades ago. And this study actually propelled Lipitor to generate billions in revenues. And this is why statins are called the wonder drugs. Look at that incredible effect. 36% reduction in heart attack. You've got to feel pretty good about that because you're much less likely to have a heart attack if you take Lipitor. So let's look at that study, the Lipitor study. Here it is, I'm just showing you that's real, that there is a 36% reduction in fatal coronary heart disease and non-fatal heart attack, myocardial infarction. So let's look at that study the same way I looked at that 1986 study. We're going to look at the percent of people in that study that did not have a heart attack or did not die versus those that took the Lipitor versus those that didn't. And here it is. So again, these are the percent of people that did not have an adverse event, like dying is an adverse event. And so I'm graphing here percent of people, for example, in the middle that survived. So there's basically almost no difference between those that got placebo and those that got the Lipitor. And yet it's a bit of, I like the where's Waldo. Where is that 36% reduction in the risk of heart disease? That's right there. 36, that little sliver of a difference between those that got Lipitor and those that got placebo is a 36% reduction in risk. And I just love this little guy. Okay. I could put something on there, but I think his face says it all. Are you serious? Come on, I wasn't born yesterday. I know 36%, and that's not 36%. Come on now. No, it is 36%. Let's look at it. How can that be 36%? So look at the real data. Okay? The real difference, and why that is such a sliver, is because the real difference in percent of people that did not have an adverse effect is 1.1%. 98.1% on Lipitor did not have a heart attack or die of heart disease. 97% did not have a heart attack or die of coronary heart disease. So based on this study, if you have that high cholesterol and you go to your doctor and you say, what's the likelihood I will not have a heart attack or die in the next 5 years? Well, you can use this right here. You have a 97% chance of not dying of heart disease based on the placebo finding here. But let's get to the 1%, because the ad said 36%. Let's go back to that ad. It says 36%. How many people noticed the small blue text at the bottom on the blue font? Let's read that fine print and expand it a bit. This means, in a large clinical study, 3% of the people taking the sugar pill had a heart attack compared to 2% on Lipitor. They are telling you that the real difference is 1%. 1% means that out of every 100 people taking Lipitor, only one will have one less heart attack. 99 will get no benefit whatsoever over the course of the next 4 years. And how do they say 36% and how do they get away with it? Same thing they did in 1986 with that trial. You take that real difference, which is 1%. This is called the absolute risk. That's the real risk. You divide it by 3%, which is the difference between placebo and 100%. Why do they do that? Well, because you can then inflate 1.1% to become 36%. That's why they do that. It's called relative risk. And it allows you basically to cheat. And of course, why do they do that? Well, if the ad said Lipitor reduces the risk of heart attack by 1%, how many people would want to take the drug? But that's the real difference. And that's the study that propelled Lipitor to have so many people, almost half of adult Americans are now taking a statin, and Lipitor has generated billions and continuing to generate billions, despite the fact that it's now generic. Let's look at another study. This is now another type of statin that many people are taking, Crestor. This is the study that propelled Crestor to generate billions. And look at what the primary investigator said about it, John Castelline. It's spectacular, the findings. Crestor prevents a first heart attack. So he's saying you will not get a heart attack if you're on Crestor. And Steve Nissen, head of the Cleveland Clinic, it's breathtaking, blockbuster, paradigm shifting. This is like a Bruce Willis movie in which he's saving the world. Well, let's look at the results, okay? Well, first, I take the courses for MDs just because I want to see what is it that MDs are seeing in their education. So this is what I saw in a course in which they covered that trial. And it looks really impressive. The rate of heart attacks and death from heart disease is dropped by 44%. And this is what physicians see in their education and what they see at conferences. It's huge. But I read the study. So let's look a little more closely at that actual study. The study was terminated at 1.9 years. So everything beyond 1.9 years doesn't count. So we eliminate that part. That doesn't count. Now, this is showing the rate of events over the course of the 2 years. And actually, if everybody had a heart attack, this would be at 1.0. Notice the scale doesn't even go to 0.1. So you're looking at the bottom of the scale. Prepare yourself. This is not the graph that was in the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm going to show you the graph that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine that provided the data for this graph. Here we go. I'm serious. I'm not making this stuff up. This is a cut and paste for the New England Journal of Medicine. The same two lines and that ridiculously small p-value, which says it's significant, is a 44% difference. It's the same kind of relative risk amplification of a minuscule finding that you have here. And this is what Steve Nissen, head of cardiology at Cleveland Clinic, says it is breathtaking. It's a blockbuster. And again, this is showing the incidence of heart attacks, which is almost zero. These people were horribly uncooperative. Almost no one had a heart attack. And that's how you artificially create this difference. And again, I'm showing you the percent of people that do not have an adverse event in this Crestor study. And you see that basically it's almost all 100%. Almost no one had a heart attack, and the two groups are virtually identical. How do you make 44%? You take 1.2, which is the real difference, divided by 2.8. With some rounding, you get 44%. This is how the drug industry, which pays these investigators to amplify minuscule effects. And you could say, well, do you just present this in conferences? No. I also published this. I work with Ufi Ravenskov. We published this paper 5 years ago. What I'm telling you now is in this peer-reviewed medical journal, Expert Review of Clinical Pharmacology. We have it right in the title that the statin research has been deceptive. They have led people to believe that these drugs are safe and effective when they are not. We have here in our conclusion that the war on cholesterol has been fought by advocates who have used statistical deception. The reality is the benefits are trivial, the adverse effects are substantial. I want to show you one more study. So it's very important. In this study, you have people who already have heart attacks and high risk of heart disease. And it's one of the first studies ever published on statins, published 26 years ago. And it basically, the findings have not been replicated. I'm going to forgive the fact that it was actually designed and implemented by Merck Pharmaceutical. The data were actually analyzed by a Merck employee. And in fact, it really wasn't 12% versus 8%. They rounded off. It's actually about a 3% difference. I'm going to forgive all that. We're going to take this study at face value. This was a study of 44 people at high risk of heart disease given either statin, which is simvastatin, or placebo. And there was a 4% difference in death, not just heart disease death, 4% difference in real mortality. Again, a finding that has never been replicated. But let's look more closely at this study, which is so important. In 2001, an additional analysis of this study was conducted to study people that had what's called the lipid triad, which means they have high LDL, but they also have high triglycerides and low HDL, which is unhealthy. And they compared them to people that had equally high LDL, they had low triglycerides and high HDL, meaning basically these are healthy people. And they looked at the effect of the statins. Now, the people that are unhealthy, having high LDL, high triglycerides, and low HDL, they're the ones in the open squares. And they're the ones in which it's going down because they're having heart attacks and they're dying of heart disease. So that's the percentage of people that did not have a heart attack. And in this group, there was actually an improvement. You go from the open squares to the open circles, and you see there were fewer events in the people that were unhealthy, had the high triglycerides and low HDL. But look at the two lines in which you have an open circle, you have filled circle and filled square. These two lines overlap. These are people who had what you will find in people on a low-carb diet. These are people who had low triglycerides, high HDL, but also had extremely high LDL. And then LDL was lowered with the statin, lowered to the same degree as you have with the unhealthy people. And there's no difference in the lines. This is the only study that gives us some insight as to whether statins could help someone on a low-carb diet. And the answer is no. And so there is no statin benefit for someone with high LDL, low triglycerides, and high HDL. And in their summary, you can see that the lipid triad, that's the unhealthy group, I have it here on the left, there is a reduction in events with the statin. But in the people with the isolated high LDL, that means high LDL alone, there is no benefit, no statistically significant effect. So this is the evidence we have that says that statins do not provide benefit to people that are healthy, essentially people that are low carb. So to summarize this, these studies have all been published decades ago. And those studies showed a small real benefit, maximum about 3% benefit, primary, secondary prevention. There has never been an explicit study done on healthy people who are clearly healthy, that is, they have low triglycerides, high HDL, and no study on non-smokers. Finally now, you could say, well, okay, so I get a 1 or 2% benefit. Is that really worth it? Well, if there are no adverse effects, that would actually help people. But what about the adverse effects? Let's look at what the American Heart Association says here in their publication last year. Statin safety. Muscle effects. You see lots of people reporting that there are muscle effects and they have muscle pain. According to the American Heart Association, no more than 1% of all people treated with statins have real muscle effects. They say, well, they have more. They might have what's called the nocebo effect. Nocebo effects is that they're told that statins cause you to have muscle pain, and that's why people report it. But it's not real. It's not really caused by the statin. And that nocebo effect was raised as well by Stephen Nissen, who says that statins have this bad reputation because there's a cult out there that have unscientific criticism of the statins, like what I'm giving you today. I'm a part of this cult. And he says intolerance represents a nocebo effect, that many people who are intolerant, that report pain with statins, it's only because their friends on the internet told them statins cause pain, but it's not real drug-induced pain. Well, here's a discussion by Stephen Nissen and 2 other statin advocates in which they're talking about statin intolerance. And Stephen Nissen actually says, what's your estimate of the percent of people that actually are statin intolerant? That people have an illness with statin. People feel awful, they have pain. And these are 2 statin advocates. Okay, what does Stephen Nichols say? If you prescribe a statin to people, within 1 year, 30 to 40% of those people will stop taking the statin because they feel lousy, because they've got pain, muscle pain, soreness. So he's saying the real effect, no one's talking about nocebo here, the real effect is that at least 30 to 40%, and even more have been reported, stop taking the statin because of the side effects. And what does Christy Ballantyne say? It gets to a quality of life issue. Many people try the statins, but they have problems. So these statins cause real pain in people. And in fact, Christy Ballantyne confirmed this, saying this study on the right wasn't even in people after you eliminate all the people that couldn't tolerate the statin. Now, what percent of people report pain, muscle pain? As much as 18.5%, depending on the type of statin. These are people living with pain as a result of taking the statin because they've been told it has so many benefits. So what is this? Remember, the American Heart Association says only 1%. It's actually more like 40 or 50% have these adverse effects. American Heart Association says diabetes. Statins cause diabetes in an extremely small incidence rate of people. 0.2% of people who take statins will develop diabetes. Well, they didn't cite this study, which is perhaps the most important study on diabetes and statins. This is a study cited by the government, Finland government, not supported by a pharmaceutical company. They had a large number of people, none of them had diabetes at the beginning, randomly assigned to either get statins or placebo. And they really did the right study. They looked at A1C, they looked at blood sugar, they looked at multiple markers of type 2 diabetes. And so what you find is spontaneously, over the course of 6 years, 6% of the people on the placebo developed type 2 diabetes. But of those on statins, nearly twice as many developed diabetes. Over 11% developed diabetes. So you're adding another 5% to the people that spontaneously develop diabetes as a result of taking a statin. And so this work is so cautiously and carefully conducted that they're monitoring over years the percent of people that are now developing diabetes based not only on the fact that they're taking the statin, but they're also looking at the dose of the statin. So a low dose of statin at 10 milligrams per day, you're seeing that develop over 6 years. And the higher dose, which is recommended for people with very high cholesterol, you see a much higher rate of diabetes being developed. So this is a very real phenomenon. It is something very real that you need to be concerned about. And of course, developing type 2 diabetes means you now have an increased likelihood of developing cancer, of Alzheimer's, and of course, heart disease, as well as renal disease. So the statin is increasing likelihood you will develop all kinds of diseases, and it has almost no benefit whatsoever. And I'm pointing out that this study was done on men because it appears that women are even more sensitive than men to develop diabetes as a result of being on statin. So in this paper, again, published peer-reviewed medical journal, what these investigators noticed was the percentage of people that developed diabetes in these statin trials is associated with the percentage of people in the study that were women. More women in the trial ultimately had the entire group, a greater percentage of people developed diabetes, with the highest level of diabetes in the Women's Health Initiative on the far right, which of course was 100% women. So it does appear as if women are even more sensitive than men, as they report here, a provocative association of female sex with increased odds of diabetes in people taking statins. American Heart Association, looking at cognitive events. American Heart Association says that the FDA reports that there are non-serious, reversible forgetfulness type of adverse events. Well, I've got an arrow pointed there and said, well, how can that be non-serious? If it's reversible, that means when you stop taking the statin, it goes away. How can you call that non-serious? And there are other forms of cognitive impairment. But they say it's okay because a causal link between these effects and a statin has not been established. Well, they didn't include this incredibly important study, published 8 years ago. What they had were 75-year-old people who had been diagnosed with dementia, formally, officially diagnosed with dementia, all of them on a statin. Under medical supervision, all these people stopped their statins. And we know that they stopped it because the cholesterol rose in these people. After 6 weeks of stopping the statin, they're now retested. And their cognition improved. Cholesterol increased. The dementia was gone after 6 weeks. And now the critical factor. They were all put back on the statin. And very quickly, the dementia returned. So this is a challenge, re-challenge. This is a paper published 8 years ago. No one has followed up on this. How many 75-year-old people, how many elderly people on a statin have been diagnosed with dementia, presumably because of brain atrophy? But what's really happening is the statin has been getting into the brain, and the brain needs cholesterol to make new memories. And so the statin is interfering with a fundamental function of the brain, which is to create new synapses, to create new brain cells, all of which are necessary to make memories. And the statin interferes with that function. So again, with the epidemic of Alzheimer's disease we have now, and with such a high percentage of older people on statins, we don't know if this is related to statins because no one is following up on these studies. Now, I only covered a few of the adverse effects, but when you block cholesterol, you're blocking production of sex steroids, such as testosterone. And these are papers published in medical journals on a reduction of testosterone in men, on erectile dysfunction in people on statins. When you cause deterioration of muscles, you increase proteins in the blood, which then interferes with kidney function. So you have kidney disease, you have muscle injuries with people on statins. And of course, it's been well documented, type 2 diabetes, cataracts, renal failure, and cancer, and liver dysfunction. These are all out there. This is not an internet cult. These are papers that are published in peer-reviewed medical journals that statins cause harm. And I've been very fortunate now to make this as my second career. So as a part of it, I'm publishing papers in medical journals. And I was actually invited by the editors of PLOS One, it's a very prestigious journal, to write a commentary about statins. And my colleagues here, all of which are MDs, we reviewed the literature on statins. And we divided the adverse effects into what you can perceive, which basically means you feel like crap. You've got muscle aches, you've got gastrointestinal distress, you've got all cognitive symptoms, and this is publications showing you feel lousy. And then there are delayed adverse effects, such as type 2 diabetes. You can't feel that it's developing. Increased susceptibility to herpes. shown with statins as well. So we published this in PLOS One last year. As I bring this to a close, I want to get back to the people with FH, because in medical school, and what most doctors believe is they have one anomaly, that is high LDL, and that causes heart disease. Well, this is a really interesting anomaly in people with FH that most people don't know about. And that has to do with a gene that increases susceptibility to heart disease and Alzheimer's disease. So the ApoE protein is necessary for lipid transport. And so what you need here is that what you find is ApoE4 is the component of that gene that increases your susceptibility to develop heart disease and Alzheimer's. And the people with FH are much more likely than to have an ApoE4 positive. An ApoE4 double positive, meaning you get one from each parent. It's very rare in the general population, but it's 9 times more in the people with FH. And this makes them much more susceptible to develop Alzheimer's disease and heart disease. And why is this relevant? Because here is a person that is ApoE4 positive, and he's developing dementia, and he's got metabolic syndrome, and he is put on a ketogenic diet with exercise, and he has improvements in all these measures. In addition, his dementia reversed. And so whereas he scored 26 as the threshold for dementia, and he was below that in his test at 22, after 12 weeks of low-carb diet and exercise, he went up to what's normal, which is 30. This shows the importance of keeping blood sugar down and exercising, even if you've got the genetic susceptibility. So to conclude, cholesterol has been in the streetlight because it is profitable to lower cholesterol, not because it actually causes heart disease. LDL reducing medications have basically no real effect, and there has not been enough work to look at the adverse effects. I've covered the diet. What's so important about diet? FH, high cholesterol, does not cause heart disease in these people. We have yet to have a statin study with low-carb diet, but that one study gives us insight that statins will not benefit. People with high coronary artery calcium also tend to have higher blood sugar. And finally, I had the privilege to publish a paper this year, which I think is so important for our low-carb people to see. Again, the people with FH, extremely high cholesterol, if they have low insulin and they're not obese, they have no increased risk of heart disease. That's on the left. This is looking at the risk of heart disease based on insulin or waist size. And it is not until you have high fasting insulin that you see an increase in heart disease in the people with high LDL. And if you have high insulin and you're obese, you have 7 times the rate of heart disease. And so those are the critical factors that ultimately influence whether or not you develop heart disease or not. It is not the LDL. So just a reference, this book just came out, Lipid Lunacy, in which I have a chapter in this, and there's some other great chapters in this by outstanding investigators. I highly recommend this book. And so I've hurried a bit, so I hope I finished close to being on time, but it's now time for questions. And I also want to let you know that I'm on Twitter almost every day with Ken, and my username is LDL Skeptic. So thank you very much. All right, let's take questions.
Thank you so much, David. It's a pleasure to see you again, albeit virtually. Hopefully we can enjoy some fatty meat together again one day when the virus.
We're together.
We're going to start out with a poll question for everybody. There should be, yeah, there it is. So before you saw Dr. Diamond's presentation, did you worry about having high cholesterol? Yes, no, or never worried? So answer that question quickly, and then we're going to run through. Oh, there's a second question. Oh, there's 3. Okay. All right. So that's the first question. Second question, those of you who were worried, now that you've seen this presentation, are you still worried about having high total cholesterol, yes or no? And then question 3, those of you, after seeing this talk, and if you are taking a statin such as Lipitor or Crestor, are you considering stopping your statin? Yes, no, or maybe? So answer those 3 questions. I think I can predict what the answers are going to be, Doc.
Well, it's great. We had quite an attentive group who are very open-minded.
Yeah.
I like the answer. Boy, 97%. This is so gratifying to see 97%
Yeah.
are no longer concerned about high cholesterol.
Absolutely. While you guys are still answering the survey, I'm going to go ahead and answer the first question so we don't run behind.
Let's also, let me just say this, Ken, I am not giving medical advice that
That's
people
right.
should
Yeah.
speak with their doctor.
None of this entire conference is medical advice. That's
If
exactly
you're
right.
considering stopping your statin,
So Carla says, how often should our family physician be checking a lipid panel?
lipid panel I think has value, not the LDL-C. Part of the lipid panel will tell you your LDL-C and or total cholesterol, and they will flash in bright red letters that you should be concerned about it if your total cholesterol is over 200 or your LDL-C is over 70 or 100. Ignore that part of the lipid panel.
Yep.
The lipid panel helped me because I saw my triglycerides were very high. So there are components of the lipid panel that are important. The triglycerides, you really don't want them to be over 150, and preferably it'd be really nice for them to be below 100. And you want your HDL preferably to be above 40. And frankly, if you can get your ratio of triglycerides to HDL to be 1-to-1, that would be ideal. The rest, frankly, in a standard lipid panel, I would say really is not important.
Yeah, I totally agree. From a PhD perspective, that's perfect. And then from an MD perspective, if you're young and relatively healthy, I might want to check a lipid panel once a year up until you're 40, 45, 50. Then we might start checking it twice a year. Now, if you're metabolically very unhealthy, I might want to check your lipid panel every 3 to 6 months. But I agree with Dr. Diamond. I'm only going to be focusing on and worried about your triglycerides and your HDL cholesterol. I really could care less what your total cholesterol and your LDL cholesterol are, unless they're very low, in which case that could actually be pointing to a problem if you're not on a cholesterol lowering medication. But yeah, if you've got metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, hypertriglyceridemia, if you have one of these diagnoses, then I might want to check your lipid panel every 3 to 6 months.
Well, let me add to that. If you've got metabolic syndrome, then you've got a disease that's fully reversible.
Yes.
There is nothing magical that's going to come out of a lipid panel that your doctor will suddenly be able to say, aha, we know what the problem is. Well, the problem is you got metabolic syndrome. The problem is you have high blood pressure. The problem is you're obese. You know, you're not going to find anything in that panel that will be magical. And so I would say address the obvious health issues. If you're obese, and it's probably because of carbs. I believe 99%, maybe 100% of people can reverse that obesity by going low carb. And you may need to include intermittent fasting to really lose the weight. If you got I lowered my triglycerides without medication by 75% by going low carb. I took medication. So again, there's nothing magical in a lipid panel that you can't address by changing your lifestyle.
Yeah, I totally agree. I don't know if I have FH or and for those of you who are asking, FH stands for familial hypercholesterolemia. But my last lipid panel, my total cholesterol was 350 and my LDL cholesterol was 250.
Wow.
I don't care about either of those numbers. I'm never going to take a statin for that. My triglycerides were very, very low, and my HDL was well above the normal level, so it was high. Let's see. Jennifer says,
FH. I think it's important. You probably don't have the genetic factor of FH. So FH is a real genetic anomaly. It means that your cholesterol can't bind very well to the cholesterol receptor, so your liver cranks out maybe 5 times more cholesterol because it's not getting into the cells very well. That is a real genetic anomaly, and it's estimated about 1 out of every 400 people.
Yep.
Now, you have high cholesterol, but it's probably not FH.
Right. And now most family doctors or primary care doctors, if they see a total cholesterol of above 250, they might even label you with FH. But that is not appropriate. That's not proper. The only way to know if you have FH is to check the genetics, which most primary doctors never do.
And I'll tell you something else very important. I've written about this. They're now testing cholesterol in children to find those who have FH. And when they see children as young as 10 years old, if they have high cholesterol, they are putting these children on statins.
Yep.
The American Pediatric Society recommends children go on statins. And I think this is so wrong.
Egregious. Okay, Doc, Jennifer wants to know which tests, in addition to the CAC, do you find are most reliable in measuring someone's heart health?
The one that stands out by far is the coronary artery calcium.
Yep.
That is the one, frankly, that's been around for decades, described over 20 years ago. And it shows your likelihood of having a heart attack. If you get a 0 on that coronary artery calcium test, the CAC, you have almost no chance of having a heart attack in the next 10 years. I mean, it's basically go to 10 years from now, whatever your age is, and 99%, you're guaranteed, as long as you continue your same lifestyle, not to have a heart attack. I would suggest the very next measure would be your fasting glucose. You can get away from lipids because the triglycerides simply relate to blood sugar. And so if you look at your fasting sugar and your A1C, which is sort of a chronic measure of your blood sugar, and if your A1C is 5.5 or less, definitely you want it below 6. Again, you have a very low likelihood of having a stroke or heart disease.
Yep, totally agree. The main test I would look for as a primary care doctor, definitely the CAC score would be number 1. I would want to know what your hemoglobin A1C is. I would want that to be under 5.7, preferably even lower than that. I would want to know what your triglycerides were. I would want to know what your HDL cholesterol is. And I would want to know what your C peptide is, which is a proxy marker for insulin production or a fasting insulin. I think those are preeminent for actually predicting your risk of a heart attack or a stroke. I think also your waist to height ratio, not necessarily your BMI, but are you holding fat in the middle, inside your abdomen? So those are the markers that I look at. And I think that those are the markers every doctor should look at. I find it egregious that the American Academy of Pediatrics are trying to put children on statins. It infuriates me.
Let me add, I think you made a very good point about fasting insulin. Now, you may have low blood sugar, but that's only because your pancreas is working overtime,
Right.
spewing out lots of insulin to keep that blood sugar low. And you're basically on your way to becoming type 2 diabetic. So
Yep.
that is actually a really good measure. What is your fasting insulin? Because that's giving you some idea of how hard your body's working to keep your blood sugar low. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah. Do we have time for one more question? Okay. The AA, this is from Karen. She said the AARP just came out with an article about giving statins to everyone over 75 because they help lower inflammation based on a retrospective study of 300,000 veterans. What do you think about that?
The AARP is awful in all the advice they give when it comes to heart disease. They are dominated by vegetarians, so they'll recommend you not eat red meat. It's horrible. They're dominated by the people who say cholesterol is harmful to you. And so you should not take any health advice from the AARP. Yes, statins have a mild anti-inflammatory effect, and they have a mild anticoagulant effect. And that is, in fact, why statins produce a very small beneficial effect on heart disease. And that's the difference in the CETP inhibitors and the statins. It's simply a slight anti-inflammatory effect.
Yeah, I totally agree. The AARP, they're as bad as the ADA and the AHA.
Right.
Thank you so much, Dr. Diamond. It's a pleasure to have you. I'm honored that you came on and did this for us. Guys, everybody's saying there's hours of video of Dr. Diamond lecturing on this very thing on YouTube. I've got one of his videos on my YouTube channel. They're all over the place out there. So follow him on Twitter, check that out, get a copy of that book if you really want to dig deep into the lipid question.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks a lot, Doctor. Have a good day.
Okay.
Okay, now I'm going to kick it back over to Joe and Rachel. You guys can take it from here.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Berry and Dr. Diamond. That was amazing information.
That was some bold revelations about statin medications that we really need to know. And I think it'd be interesting to check in with our final poll results for the 3 questions that we asked. So number 1, before you saw the talk from Dr. Diamond, did you worry about high cholesterol? And the final results are 48% yes. very afraid. So for number 2, those of you who were worried, now that you have seen the talk by Dr. Diamond, are you still worried about high cholesterol?
And
98% now, no.
wow.
That is incredible.
Wow.
And our third question is, after seeing this talk, and if you are taking a statin such as Lipitor or Crestor, are you considering stopping your statin? And I think that this is the most exciting answer of the day. It is 80% yes.
Wow.
Is that awesome?
That is incredible.
Such great news. So our next presenter is going to be somebody that we love and somebody that's a new daddy. It is Dr. Robert Cywis.
So to attend Dr. Cywis' presentation, I'm going to show you guys once again how to get yourselves back to the main stage, which is located in the tab or the browser of the virtual summit button.
Now remember, pay attention because you will be doing this between each of the speakers' presentations. And a little side note, if you have the Zoom app, you may see something different. Simply go back to the browser or tab that you launched the platform in.
Okay, so let me go ahead and share the screen for you guys so that you can just see this. Okay, so you should be able to see our screen here. And once again, this is where you should be. We're going to put you into the lobby. And from the lobby, you're just going to go right down here to where you see main stage. And then you can click on over here, click to watch the presentations, or you can even click right on the middle. Also want to remind you guys, this little briefcase over here, if you click on that, you can save the actual presentation for yourself. So once we get out of this room and the room closes up, you'll be able to go over here and see Robert Cywis, and where it currently says scheduled, that's going to change so that you can get in there and join the next presentation.
So go ahead and get started heading over to Dr. Cywis' session, and we will see you in there.